once I feel that my mix is getting close to being finished, I like to switch over to various sets of smaller speakers to change up my perspective. These smaller speakers can include the internal speakers of my Mac, an external pair of computer monitor speakers, laptop speakers, those from an actual television set, and a pair of Oratones, for example. Listening through these smaller speakers serves a couple of purposes. For one, they instantly give me a fresh perspective on my mix. When you've been listening to your near-field monitors for several hours, your ears become attuned to focusing on and perceiving your mix in a particular way. Changing up your listening to a set of smaller speakers has the effect of turning your mix on its head, so to speak. Now, this is critical to our discussion of music for spots because when you're working quickly on a deadline, you usually don't have time to step away from your mix for a couple of hours and clear your ears. And if you mix your own music, you probably know the value of taking breaks. Switching up and listening to a different set of speakers can help with this issue. For me, listening on computer monitors, for example, can show me what the true focus of my mix is. It helps me to hear what the first-time listener will likely take away from my mix. After the first listen, that is. This is an important way to think about your mix because you don't know how many times someone will see your spot on TV, and therefore, the musical message must be clear and obvious the first time around. Near fields are great because they help us to get all the detail and finesse into our mix. Limited range speakers are great because they show us our mix in a more basic and broad type of way. Not being able to focus on all of those tiny details and nuances in your mix is actually really valuable for us. Your audience, after all, might only have 30 seconds to hear your music, and therefore probably won't be focused on the small additional musical subtleties you put into your mix. Now, I'm not telling you to avoid detail and nuance in your tracks, especially if it helps you to produce a great piece of music. I'm simply pointing out that limited range speakers can be helpful to show you the big picture. Switching to another set of speakers can be like shining a spotlight on certain aspects of your mix. Volume issues often become more apparent. Perhaps you find that lead instrument or vocal just isn't present enough. Maybe it gets buried in the mix, or on the other hand, maybe it sticks out too much. What I find beneficial about speakers like Oratones, for example, is that they shine the spotlight on the mid-range of the mix. I've heard many accomplished engineers say that if you have the mid-range correct in your mix, you have a mix that will translate well. So what is the mid-range? Well, there are many differing definitions as to the exact range of frequencies included, but somewhere between 250 Hz to 5 kHz would be a good starting point. You can think of the mid-range as the common denominator across all playback systems. And since most musical fundamentals live in the mid-range, equalization changes here can have drastic effects on your mix. Consider this. The average consumer stereo system, like the one in the car for example, will often only have two simple EQ controls, bass and treble. This means that these frequency ranges are adjustable by the listener and can be tweaked to suit both their listening environment and their personal taste. If they want a little bit more bass, they have control over that, and the same goes for the high end if they want it a bit brighter. It's kind of like cooking a meal for someone and giving them the option to add salt or pepper. Oratones will help you focus on the all-important mid-range because they'll get some of the low and high frequencies out of the spotlight. This is because they have a limited frequency range, and were initially intended to demonstrate what recordings would likely sound like when reproduced on radio or TV. Oratones are no longer being produced, but other companies have popped up that are making monitors which achieve a similar result. When I'm balancing on Oratones, I'm able to focus on the clarity of the mid-range, making sure that instruments are distinct enough. You'll often find that it's easier to level out your vocals on an Oratone because the mix's internal balance will be so much more apparent, and any vocal level inconsistencies will jump out at you. Another reason I like to check my mix on different speakers is to find out if the bass is perceptible enough. Oftentimes, the bass in your mix will simply not cut through when switched over to limited range speakers. If this is the case, I might go back and tweak it a bit by adjusting its level a touch or perhaps bringing out some of its upper harmonics through the use of EQ. If your overall mix is sitting in a good place, however, you don't want to do anything too extreme and end up destroying it. So once I've made an adjustment on the smaller speakers, I'll go back to my near fields and see if I still like the mix. This is a balancing act that sometimes takes a couple of rounds going back and forth to get just right. A couple of other ways to bring out the bass is by using a plugin like Waves Max Bass, which will help to psychoacoustically make the bass more apparent. It does this by creating harmonics that get added to the original bass signal, which trick the ear into perceiving lower bass frequencies. They give you a feeling of deeper bass. Another thing to try is adding a bit of overdrive to your bass. For that, I'll often use Logic's Overdrive plugin to give my bass a bit of saturation. The only thing is, you'll have to see if you like the color this adds and if the trade-off is worth it to you. Remember that the client is often listening to your mix on laptop speakers, computer speakers, headphones, etc. Don't assume that your music will be heard on the highest fidelity audiophile system. At the end of the day, you can't satisfy every single listener completely. However, by checking your mix on different systems, it'll reveal aspects of itself that you might not have considered or noticed otherwise.